According to a recent document released by the FAA, this is a scene that they would like to see become a reality. Stacked Starship taking to the skies in suborbital or orbital flight. Elon's dream finally being realized. And coupled with this is Elon's plans to turn Boca Chica into Space City. The actual name, of course, is Starbase, and Elon has gone so far as to rename the town that, no longer Boca Chica, but Starbase. Of course, you can't do that unilaterally without some sort of government approval. Nevertheless, it seems that Elon wants to make this happen, and there are very few people trying to stop him from doing it currently. However, the FAA document is full of conditions and provisions that seem to be trying to assure the public that this local space launch facility is going to be disrupting their lives as little as possible. However, if we're keeping things real here, Starship is going to disrupt the local area considerably if it's going to carry out its function as it's supposed to. That is to say, a rapid cadence of launches for refueling and other things that are necessary in order to get Starship anywhere besides low Earth orbit. You have to have a rapid series of launches in order to refuel Starship as rapidly as possible so it can make its journey to the moon or Mars or any place else, and the FAA document at present does not allow for this. And this is very understandable. The Boca Chica launch pad is located within a stone's throw of a public beach, within a couple hundred meters of a public highway. And so how often can you expect the local public to accept closing this highway and closing this beach for SpaceX operations? So here's the question. Can we realistically expect Starbase to be a spaceport on the level of Cape Canaveral, or perhaps even more ambitious given that Elon is talking about daily Starship launches? Will this location ever be appropriate for something like that? Or should SpaceX be looking for other alternatives as soon as possible, as soon as the testing phase of this process is over? Well, we're going to examine those questions in this video and see whether or not Boca Chica should really be SpaceX Starbase. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. So let's take a real quick look at a Lunar Starship mission from Boca Chica. It would, of course, involve launching the Lunar Starship, but it would also involve, of course, refueling it. Now, there are all kinds of estimates as to how many refueling launches would be required, and it goes anywhere from 6 to 14. In my opinion, 10 is a probably pretty good estimate, a little bit lower than what Blue Origin and frankly the GAO also says, but at the same time, not completely refueling Lunar Starship in orbit could be problematic. Liquid natural gas carriers or tankers, they travel with their tanks either completely full or completely empty because of the slosh effect. If the tanks are not completely full, the supercooled liquid fuel can slosh around during minor course corrections and really play havoc with your navigation. So frankly, refueling Lunar Starship completely before a mission is probably your best bet. And by the way, this is the main reason that Starship has header tanks exclusively reserved for landing, because they are fully fueled at the time of landing, so when Starship carries out that extreme maneuver before it sets down, there's no slosh effect, and that is very important if you want to set down with precision. Unfortunately, completely refueling Starship will require the number of launches that Blue Origin is claiming, 1 for Lunar Starship and 13 to load up 1,300 tons worth of fuel. Now, if you compartmentalize the fuel, perhaps some tanks for the journey, tanks for landing, tanks for returning to the gateway, essentially redesigning the fuel system for Starship, this might simplify matters, but of course that would also stretch out development time. Now, these 14 launches would need to be carried out in a very rapid cadence, 1 every 2 weeks at the most, and even during that period of time, 28 weeks, you would still have a little bit of propellant boil off in orbit. Not a tremendous amount, but it would still be noticeable, perhaps requiring even another launch. Nevertheless, you would need to launch a minimum of once every 2 weeks, or 28 weeks worth of solid activity at Boca Chica, where SpaceX would be turning out thousands and thousands of tons worth of liquid oxygen and liquid methane, and on top of that, the local community would pretty much have no access to the highway there or to the public beach. It simply would not be practical. And in case you don't believe me, look at it this way. And during a 2-week time period, you would need to close the beach to move Starship. You'd need to close the beach to move Super Heavy. You'd need to close the beach to stack Starship on top of Super Heavy. You'd need to close the beach for a static fire, and you'd need to close the beach for a launch. All of those closures, plus all the security involved in getting people removed for every bit of activity during a 2-week time frame, would simply not be realistic. It would be far simpler to just close off the area. And I'm not trying to say that using Boca Chica is impossible. What I'm trying to say is this area simply needs to be purchased by SpaceX from the government. This area needs to no longer be accessible to the public unless they have an invitation from SpaceX. But come on, how realistic is that? I mean, there are 2 state parks right there, and the Las Palmas Wildlife Management Area. How is SpaceX going to get all of that away from the government? Well, they could make a very strong point by saying that they're going to take much better care of that land than the people who have been visiting that beach for many years. Every time I have visited Boca Chica, there is tons of trash all over the place near the beach, and I don't think this trash is created by SpaceX employees. I believe it's created by visitors to the beach, and this is typical of many beach locations throughout the United States. And SpaceX, like NASA at Cape Canaveral, could probably manage this land far more efficiently, far more responsibly, and to the benefit of the local wildlife than the local government can. Now, let me make one thing abundantly clear. I'm not advocating that this area be completely cut off from the outside public, but rather that SpaceX control the number of visitors that come on a daily basis and not have this full, unrestricted access to extremely sensitive and, frankly, dangerous technology on a daily basis. It should be more strictly controlled, perhaps not as much as Cape Canaveral, but something similar, because we are talking about the most powerful rocket in human history, and perhaps future cargoes that may include military cargoes that are going to be extremely sensitive. However, the FAA, like most government agencies, is trying to satisfy everybody while satisfying no one. They're trying to be fair to everybody while being fair to no one. And let me give you some examples. First of all, the total amount of time that SpaceX anticipates that the road is going to be closed and the beach will be closed off to public access will be 500 hours per year, just over 20 days. Now, I don't know how, in the name of hell, you're supposed to carry out 13 or 14 stacked launches of Starship with only 20 days worth of road closures without having the public buzzing around the launch pad all the time. It's just not practical. So that's okay, though, because the FAA isn't approving that many stacked launches, not even close. Curiously enough, the FAA approved 20 suborbital launches of Starship, just Starship. In other words, perhaps more ambitious versions of the tests we've already seen, like SN-15, without Super Heavy. However, only 3 Super Heavy plus Starship launches have been approved, and this would include the launch of Super Heavy without Starship, so testing Super Heavy before you try to stack them. Only 3 times during program development and 5 times a year during operations. Not nearly enough to carry out a mission beyond low Earth orbit. Now, these numbers frankly piss me off because although this number of launches is appropriate perhaps for a testing facility, it's not nearly enough for an operational Starship facility. Not with Elon's vision of a Starship launching every day or every week or even every 2 weeks. It's not even close to that, and nowhere in this document can I find any information that suggests that Boca Chica is ever going to be anything like this. And that's not fair to the public. They need to be made aware that this is the long-term plan. Now, anybody who studies Elon's work should know this, but nevertheless, it should be made clear in the FAA document. So like I said, this isn't fair to SpaceX and their long-term goals, nor is it fair to the people of Southern Texas. If Starbase is indeed going to become Starbase, then the FAA should lay out the long-term plan in detail. It should be clear that Starship is going to be launched not 5 times, but a couple dozen times a year, most probably, perhaps even more than that. It should also be made very clear that the beach will not be accessible most of the time, not 6 or 7% of the time. This whole notion of slowly increasing people's expectations as time goes on is fundamentally flawed. The more you increase the number of launches without really telling people that that's what they're going to expect, the less they're going to trust the whole thing and the FAA in general. And if they stop this process later on, after this particular approval goes through, as I think it probably will, then SpaceX will have built a redundant launch pad, redundant landing pad, integration towers, desalination plant, power plant, payload processing facility, liquefier, expanded solar farm, State Highway 4 pull-offs, all of this stuff without having a Starbase to go with it. Instead, it will simply be an expanded testing facility. Is this the appropriate place to build a Starbase? Well, I think that all depends. I think it would be very good to the local community to have this. SpaceX will bring a tremendous amount of jobs if they are launching with this kind of cadence. They're going to increase and improve the economy dramatically. Elon is going to invest millions of dollars of his own personal wealth in the economy as well. However, it's also going to fundamentally change the nature of everyday life in the Boca Chica region. When it comes right down to it, what's the trade-off here? What really is going to be lost if this tiny sliver of public land is handed over to SpaceX and to space exploration and all the benefits that go with it? How much is the public, the United States, and the state of Texas really going to lose? Public access to a couple of beaches? Now granted, this means a lot to the local community, but the amount of economy and the amount of prosperity that can be brought in conjunction with Starbase, in my opinion, more than makes up for the inconvenience represented by having a Starbase in your backyard. I certainly wouldn't mind, unless, of course, there's going to be some sort of probability of anomalies that could create some sort of danger to South Padre Island. But according to the FAA document, this threat does not exist, and we need to take them at their word. And think about it for a moment. Our return to the moon may very well hinge on what the people in the Boca Chica region and in South Padre and Harlingen and other cities in the area have to say about Starbase, whether or not they approve this for its ultimate goal, its ultimate use as a full-time spaceport. All of that having been said, SpaceX needs to be prepared for the worst. It is entirely possible that local opposition, public opposition, government opposition, or opposition from the Fish and Wildlife Service for that matter, might stop what they're trying to do at Boca Chica. They need to have an alternative lined up, and fortunately, they do, launching from sea platforms. They are very, very early on in their developmental stages when it comes to this, though. As I've mentioned before, I believe that Phobos and Deimos represent the best way to get Starship to orbit or to the moon or Mars for that matter. They're more isolated, they're more secure, they don't disrupt anybody as far as the general public is concerned, they don't represent any kind of danger as far as anomalies go, they're just a much better solution. However, SpaceX is a long ways from turning these things from oil platforms into viable space launch platforms. There's still a great deal of work to be done. However, Boca Chica could be a part of this even if they decide not to be a full-fledged Starbase. You could develop Starship and Super Heavy, build them at Boca Chica, and then hop them over to a transport bound for one of these platforms. That's right, hop them over. It's a great way to test the engines, to do a more ambitious static fire, if you will, and test their ability to take off and land effectively without putting anybody really at risk. And then, once they've successfully hopped, take them out to Phobos or Deimos for launch. Given the extreme opposition that new spaceports have faced in Great Britain, for example, to the point to where payloads have been restricted to 500 kilograms in that country, and so therefore a company called Black Arrow has decided to take the payloads offshore and launch them from a cargo ship, which I think is the perfect solution for them. It's also the perfect solution for Starship. Taking this huge, massive rocket offshore where it's going to disrupt nobody's lives and endanger no one also. However, as I said, the developmental process on Phobos and Deimos are still in their very early stages. It's not something that's going to be completed overnight or indeed on Artemis's timeline or on Elon's timeline on getting starships to Mars. If we're going to get to Mars by 2025, 2026, it's going to require that SpaceX have a launch facility already established, firmly established, with a rapid launch cadence in operation by that date. And the only facilities that exist right now that seem likely to be able to fit that bill are Cape Canaveral and Boca Chica. So really, the ball is in South Texas's court. They can decide whether or not they want to be part of mankind's future in space. But now is not the time for deception or appeasement. The FAA needs to lay all the cards on the table, make sure that everybody understands what the long-term objectives are and what they can expect from Starbase in the future, and then make an informed decision as to whether or not this is something they want in their community. In my opinion, the benefits far outweigh the dangers and the risks and the inconveniences. This is, of course, not my decision to make, but in my opinion, future residents of Port Isabel and South Padre Island and Harlingen would thank their parents and grandparents for deciding to put this region on the map and making it a part of mankind's exploration of the solar system. I think it would completely transform this region for the better and make it just a place of historical significance that would never be forgotten. I think that's the kind of future that any community would want, and I certainly hope that this is what happens. If you like what I have to say, if you enjoy my blunt way of explaining things in my opinionated manner, you know how to support me. It's all in the description, and I could certainly use it right now, or a simple like and subscribe, and I will be very happy for that. So until the people of Boca Chica, or wherever Starship ends up establishing a base of operations, until these people recognize that space matters, space is worth an inconvenience, space is worth making sacrifices for, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.